Hi, William. Firstly, I'd like to thank you very much for taking part in this call.
That's a pleasure, Mike.
And if I can ask you to kick off really by introducing you and giving the listeners some background of who you are and what you do.
Yes, of course. Hi, my name's William Buse, and I work with businesses and teams in businesses to help them build trust and collaborative working practices amongst the team. And one of the reasons that I got involved in that is because it actually uses a lot of skills that are used in networking to make it effective. And I also work with Ecademy, the online network, to help them build their Life Members Club, which is called Blackstar.
Can you give me an idea of what sort of clients you have regarding the first thing you talked about? Is it SMEs? Is it large companies? Can you give some illustration so people know?
Yeah, of course. I've worked actually with a whole variety of different business sizes, but perhaps one of the better examples is when I did some work with one of the trade associations, the Association of British Insurers, on a project that involved a distributed team, drawing people from a number of different companies to work on a common project related to insurance fraud. And what I was doing was helping that team to gel and work across the boundaries of being in different places, having different drivers, different goals within their own organisations, and yet also having a common goal on an external project. So I helped to make all of that gel. So that's one example. I'm also working at the moment with a rapidly growing SME, and as they take on new staff, of course, they're having to engage those staff into their existing teams and get them effective quickly. So I'm helping them do that. So it's that kind of thing.
And also, some of our listeners won't have heard of Ecademy. So can you give a very brief introduction of both Ecademy and Blackstar?
Yes, of course. Ecademy is an online network that you'll find at www.ecademy, that's ECADEMY.com. And Ecademy is primarily aimed at the small and medium-sized businesses, allowing the business owners and senior people in those companies to interact online as well as offline. They run a lot of meetings and seminars and things like that where the members of Ecademy can get together and see each other face to face. But in between those meetings, there's a variety of forums, marketplaces, places where people can share their knowledge and experience online, and so help to get to know each other before they meet and continue the relationship building after they've met as well. Within that, there's a community called Blackstar, which is the Life Members Club, and that's a relatively small part of the organisation, but a very active one, involving about 400 people who've committed to membership of Ecademy for life, and who meet regularly, share their experiences, share their knowledge, help each other, and do an awful lot of networking.
Okay, so talking about your own networking, looking at the environment, where and when do you network?
Pretty much when the sun's up, Mike.
Interesting.
And sometimes when it's down too, actually. But I think networking is one of those things that it's very easy to kind of think, am I networking now or aren't I? When in fact, really what it's about is building relationships with people that you meet. I tend to be travelling a fair bit with the various bits of work that I do, and so I meet lots of people in those travels, and often the conversations are purely social, and yet really that is networking. I'm building relationships with them, I'm understanding them a bit, and maybe those conversations lead to more detailed conversations later. Maybe they don't. But whichever of those two it is, I still think that's part of the whole networking process, if you like.
Actually, I'll build on that a bit. What does networking actually mean to you?
Primarily, it means the opportunity to meet new people, to get to know them, to understand what's important for them, what sort of help they need in their business or indeed in their personal life. It's not solely a business practice at all. And it means using the knowledge that I have, both in terms of how networks work, but also in terms of the people that I have already met, knowing what they do, and being able to bring people together who can help each other, either for personal development or business development. And one of the things I try to do in all of my network engagements is to make those connections and to help get the right people together. And when I do that, people do that for me as well. So it's a two-way street, not a one-way one.
So, when you're networking, what actually do you do? You're meeting somebody for the first time. What sort of things do you say to them? Take it as though you were teaching me how to network.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing about networking, and perhaps it's worth just taking a step back and talking just for a quick moment about some common conceptions about networking.
Excellent.
And what it means. And I think when I was in corporate life, and I think a lot of people who are in big companies performing a specific role, they tend to be quite focused on that role. And when they meet new people in seminars and all those things that you tend to go on as a big organisation, the focus tends to be around the question that a lot of people ask, which is, what do you do?
Yeah.
And people then focus on their role. And in general, talking about what you do, whilst it's important at one level, most of the time, most people aren't actually going to be that desperately interested in what you do, because it's just something that we do. You know, it's part of our general lives. What they are interested in, though, is how what you do can interact with the rest of the world, and in particular with them, if that makes sense. So the first thing I would say to anybody who came to me and said, can you help me to network, is to take the focus away from themselves and what their specialism is and what their role is in whatever job they have, and to put the focus on the other person, not on what they do, but on what stops them doing what they do, what's difficult for them, what's hard. And the reason to do that is to find a means fairly quickly, if you can, of being able to help them, to give them a pointer, give them some advice, maybe give them a bit of the experience you've had in those things. So an early question might be something like, what are you working on right now? What project are you working on? People will naturally tell you about the things that are important to them in their job in that sense, in the project sense. And the follow-up question is, what makes that hard? And it's really to get to the follow-up question, but that's the key question that lets you get into talking about some things that perhaps a bit more attached to emotions as well. Because when you start talking about the things that are hard, it's hard to do that without sensing the emotions that you're feeling when it's a frustration. So that's one route. Another way to look at that is perhaps to move away from the kind of standard questions that lead to a very short and perhaps not very well thought out answer, like, what do you do? That tends to lead to an answer like, oh, I'm an accountant. It's kind of difficult to think, well, where do I go from there? You know, because it's a fairly closed answer. But if you ask the question, what's your expertise? You might still get the I'm an accountant answer, because people find it difficult to think immediately of what their expertise is. But you might also get an answer that says, my expertise actually is in understanding the details of corporation tax law and helping businesses to maximise their profits by minimising the tax liabilities they incur. Quite a different answer, and yet still the same profession underneath it.
I like that.
But that leads you to being able to discuss elements of that where you might have some knowledge of somebody who is struggling with a corporation tax bill right now, for example. Perfect client, good introduction. You might also know somebody who's involved in that field, maybe with connections to a lot of tax accountants, and then an introduction to them might be useful for collaboration. And that's what I'm trying to do all the time, is find those little connections that help people move their business or move their personal lives along. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I like that. What skills do you think that you've got that enable you to do this?
I think three things really, Mike. The first is that I've really had to actually teach myself this point and make sure that I'm conscious of it all the time. And that is the point I made earlier, that shifting the focus away from yourself and onto the other person.
Right.
And the skill that goes with that, the second one, is an ability to listen not just to the words that are being spoken to you, but what's driving them. What are the emotions underneath that? And sensing when there's an area of difficulty or frustration or annoyance that you can explore in order to help the individual you're talking to out around that area. So it's a kind of listening to the emotions skill,
yes.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think the third thing is an absolute understanding that when you help others, they will help others in their turn. And when people do that as a group, you will get the help you need. You may not get it right now. You may not get it from the person you're talking to, but you will get it because you're feeding into an environment that is helping people rather than an environment that is just looking for help. And I liken that one to if you go to a party with a gift for somebody at the party, you don't really mind who the gift is for, you just want to give it to somebody, and you've decided that you're going to give your gift before you accept one from somebody else. But so has everybody else at the party decided to take that line. Nobody is there able to accept a gift. So you can never give yours because there's nobody to give it to. So, being able to give is important, but being open to receiving when somebody is ready to give to you is just as important, and it honours them. So, that's important.
Excellent. How did you learn to network? I mean, I think you said you're sort of self-taught. How did you actually learn to do it?
I think that really started when I left corporate life. I kind of thought, like a lot of people, that I was networking when I met large groups of people, shared what I did, gave them my business card, maybe talked about how the two businesses, the corporate I was working for and their business could operate as a customer-supplier relationship. But actually, that's not really networking. That's more akin just to meeting people and doing business, but not actually networking per se. So when I left corporate life, kind of thinking I understand networking, I very quickly realised that I didn't. And so what I did was I started, first of all, with one of the face-to-face networking organisations that meets over a lunch or breakfast, joined them and began to recognise that this whole thing about being open to both give and receive and looking for opportunities to help others without necessarily looking for any return myself would eventually pay dividends. So that was a kind of Rubicon moment, I guess. And then I joined Academy because I could see the opportunities to help build relationships online and keep good lines of communication open using that tool. And in amongst that, I met some people who were clearly very skilled networkers, been involved in that kind of thing for a long time. And I looked at what they were doing, I looked at what was working for them, I chatted to them a lot, and I actually started using networking to help me to learn to network. So when people said to me things like, how can I help you, common question when you meet people in a networking environment, one of the questions I would ask is, what's the best thing that you know about networking? What's the thing that makes it work for you? And I very quickly gathered lots and lots of knowledge around different techniques, different styles, different tools, different ways of working, and just kept learning that way, and I'm still doing that.
What do you believe about yourself when you network?
What do I believe about myself? What a great question. And that's actually one of the keys, I think, being able to ask great questions that make people pause and stop and think, as you've just done, giving them cause to really examine what they do, and that's a key thing.
Such things as, you could believe you had something to offer everybody. You could believe you're a good listener.
I think what I believe about networking is two things. I think you're right. I do believe that I'm a fairly good listener, and as I say, kind of not just to the words, but to the emotions that underlie them, and recognising what those are. So I do believe I'm good at that, but I also believe I'm still learning. That I've got an enormous amount still to learn about how to do this networking thing really effectively for everybody involved in it.
And what do you believe about, you're going into a room for the first time, you don't yet know the people there. What beliefs do you have about the people that you're going to meet?
Three things. I don't know who they know, but I know they all know lots of people. And so if I can connect with them in a way that enables them to understand what I need, then I get access not to a room full of people, but to a room full of people's contacts, and that may be several thousand people. So every time you go into a networking meeting, it's really not the people in the room that you want your message to get to. Just as it's not the people in the room they want their message to get to. They're talking to me because I know people who I can introduce them and help them that aren't there. And so, key thing is to be able to explain and express what you do in a way that enables people to make those connections to people who aren't there. And in fact, I've described network value in the past to people. The value of your own network is quite difficult to put a measure on what the value of a network is. But I kind of liken it to thinking about the real value comes when people whom you don't know are talking about you to people whom you don't know. And you'll never know those conversations are happening until one day the phone rings and somebody says, I've been told I need to talk to you. And I love those calls because that's when your network's really working for you. Because I've talked a lot about how networking is about, the action of networking that I take is about finding ways to help others. Ultimately, cut to the chase, the reason we network is to get knowledge and contacts for ourselves. And the trick is, for me, is understanding that the way that you can do that most effectively, and the most effective way I know is to give knowledge and give contacts to the people that I meet. And so that it goes around and comes back to me. But ultimately, that's what I'm after, is knowledge and contacts. So it's keeping the ears open for those snippets of knowledge that help build me, and those contacts that I need to talk to.
Just to summarise that, you said that when you walk into a room, you accept you don't yet know what contacts people have. Any other beliefs you have about the people you're about to network with?
Yes, indeed. I mean, as I say, I certainly believe they all have people outside the room who will be great people that we need to contact with. So that is the first point. I think the second thing is that they're all there for the same reason that I'm there, to network with each other, and probably, with a good normal distribution, as in most things in life, you'd expect some of them to be really good networkers, and a lot of them probably not to be that skilled, and not to have that skill in their core, as it were. So one of the things that I like to try and do is to think a little bit like, if this was my party, what would I be doing as a host right now to help those people who are feeling a bit nervous and a bit uncertain, and how can I engage more with them to make them feel at home? Because if everybody feels at home, then the whole event will be more successful.
This too may sound a bit of a curious question, but do you have a personal mission when you network? Who is William when he's networking?
One thing I've learned in networking is the only person William could ever be is William.
Right.
If you put a facade or some strange cover on yourself trying to be something that you're not, it'll be very quickly found out. And because networking is a word-of-mouth process, networking works when people are talking to each other. So if you're found to be kind of hiding something or not being as open as you need to be, word of that gets around pretty quickly. So it's not an effective strategy. Again, one of the questions that you hear a lot in networking events is, how's business? And the answer you almost universally hear is, it's great, thanks, or some variation of that. I always follow that question up with, no, really, how's business? And quite often to that second question, you get a very different answer of, well, it's a bit tough at the moment. And that's an example of the kind of thing I mean. If you're finding it tough to get new business or get sales, or you've launched a new product and it's not working in the way that you'd expect, say so. Because somebody, somewhere, will have the information, the knowledge that you need to move it in the right direction instead of it just sitting there. But if you say business is great, will people refer business to you? Because you're already busy enough, aren't you? So being totally clear, being open, but in a positive way, is always the best thing to do in my experience.
Okay, excellent. Before I ask you to give your contact details, is there anything that we haven't covered that you think is worthwhile as far as explaining what makes networking work?
Well, there's one thing I think that we haven't covered, Mike, and that's really around the fact that networking is a process. It's something you can learn. It's a way of engaging with people. It's a way of finding knowledge and contacts, all those things. That makes it sound quite clinical, doesn't it? And actually, it's really about people and about spending time with people and getting to know them. And that's about having fun. So, if you're not having fun when you're networking, change the way you're doing it, because it really, really should be fun too. So I think that's critically important.
Okay, would you like to give your contact details if anybody wants to follow this up with you?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Matt. I mean, one easy way to get me, and this is primarily as a result of doing lots of stuff on Academy, which is well indexed by Google, is just to look me up by name. It's William Buist, it's B-U-I-S-T. If you Google that, you find me at the top of the list. You can get my contact details that way. But other than that, if you'd like to give me a call, my telephone number is 01291 622 598. That number will find me or a messaging system wherever I am, so just give me a call anytime.
Thank you very much.